The rain had been falling for hours, painting silver threads across the face of the river. The city lay hushed beneath its rhythm, 1,000 windows flickering with quiet blue light. I followed him there, an old man who never told me his name, only that he had once been a mason of temples and a reader of winds. We walked beyond the bridges, past the electric hum of the streets, to a place where the city's breath no longer reached. The air grew still, thick with the scent of stone and moss. There, under a crumbling archway carved with forgotten alphabets, he said softly, "This is where the river remembers." He was not a priest, but he spoke of the sacred as if it were something hidden in the body's pulse. He carried no cross, no scripture, only a small lamp and a silence that stretched between words. When he spoke again, his voice trembled like the wind touching glass. "The Father they taught you to worship was never the first one. The maker of matter, he built the cages. But the source before him breathed the spark that forgot itself." I didn't answer. I had grown up with the image of a distant God, robed in thunder and mercy, dwelling somewhere unreachable. But now his words twisted through my certainty. The idea that creation itself was not pure, that the visible world might have been spun by a lesser hand, it unsettled me. Then who was Jesus speaking to? I asked finally. He smiled without mirth. To the one before the beginning. To the silence. He called it Father because that was the only word the tongue could bear. The source beyond names, neither male nor form. The one who waits for you not above, but behind your own breath. The rain slowed. We stepped into a small garden enclosed by broken walls, vines coiling through marble like veins of time. In the center stood a cracked fountain, dry now, but its basin was filled with petals and ashes. The old man knelt, touching the surface as if testing the memory of water. When he spoke of the kingdom, he murmured, he wasn't speaking of heaven after death. He was remembering the field of light before the Maker's dream. The real Father was there, still, endless, untouched by stars or dust. I wanted to understand, but every word seemed to peel away something familiar. Why would the Father allow the Maker to trap us here? I whispered. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw not an answer but a reflection of my own question. The source does not allow or deny, he said. It dreams. The Maker shaped the dream into walls. We forgot we were the dreamers. Lightning stitched the horizon. The city glimmered beyond the ruined garden, indifferent and luminous. For a moment, I felt the thin thread of awareness stretching between my chest and something vast, like a whisper calling from beneath the riverbed. It was both terrifying and tender. I could feel my heartbeat slow, aligning with the rain, the soil, the pulse of everything. He rose and pointed toward the east. You must learn to hear the pulse, not the prayer. The prophets tried to write it down, but words decay. The tongue turns living fire into doctrine. He handed me a small stone, smooth and warm as if alive. Hold this when you forget who you are. It will remind you that the beginning was not creation, it was memory. I turned the stone in my palm. It was marked with a faint spiral, etched shallow but precise. What is it? I asked. He laughed softly. A map with no destination. The seed of return. We sat beneath the broken arch, the lamp between us throwing a halo of trembling light. He began to hum, a low vibration that seemed to move through my bones. It wasn't music. It was older, like a current beneath language. My thoughts quieted, replaced by something that felt both personal and infinite. I could almost see it, a realm of soft radiance, where no form yet all forms existed. For a moment, I knew it as home. When I opened my eyes, he was watching me. "You felt it," he said. "The Father beneath the Maker's world. The pulse before the word." I nodded, though part of me doubted it. The experience had been too brief, too fragile to trust. But something in my chest had changed, as if a window had opened inward. "How do I stay in it?" I asked. He shook his head gently. "You don't stay. You remember. Every breath, every sorrow, every kindness is a doorway. The trick is to walk through it instead of around it." The wind rose, scattering the petals into the air like faded prayers. The lamp flickered, then steadied again. "Tomorrow," he said, "the city will forget this place. But the seal will remain with you. The old temples were made of stone. Yours must be made of awareness." He stood, wrapping his cloak around him. "Do not worship what was made. Worship the silence that made the Maker." Then he left, fading into the silver mist. I sat there alone, clutching the spiral stone, the echo of his words pulsing in my ears. The rain returned, washing the ashes from the fountain. I thought of the world I had known, the prayers, the churches, the painted heavens, and felt them dissolve into something quieter, rawer. The thought came unbidden: what if all this, flesh, faith, and suffering, is only the forgetting of what we once were? The answer was not given. It unfolded in the rhythm of rain, in the breath that no longer belonged to me. The next morning, the city had already swallowed the night's memory. The rain had dried from the streets, and the markets woke to their mechanical rhythm, buses sighing, vendors shouting, faces dissolving into noise. Yet the silence from the garden clung to me like unseen incense. The stone was still in my pocket, warmer than it should have been, as though it held the echo of another world. I returned to my small apartment near the river, where books about theology and physics lay tangled together on the table. I tried to resume my old studies, to lose myself in the certainty of pages, but the words blurred. Every doctrine felt like scaffolding around something invisible. I could no longer pray in the way I had been taught. The old formulas felt hollow, like trying to speak to a shadow. So I sat in stillness, recalling his words, the pulse, not the prayer. At first there was only restlessness. My mind threw up fragments: regret, fear, the hum of electric lights. But beneath it, a rhythm began to surface, slow, steady, like the tide brushing against the shore. It wasn't something I controlled, it was something I remembered. I realized the practice wasn't about asking or thanking, it was about aligning. Not a plea, but a remembering of what already was. Days turned into a quiet unfolding. I began to see the pattern in small things: the way light scattered through a glass of water, the way strangers' voices merged into a single hum of existence. I started whispering phrases, not as supplication but as alignment: I am in the field of the Father. I am not apart. The old man's teaching deepened inside me. The source didn't grant, it became through awareness. One evening, I sat by the river, eyes half closed, watching the current reflect the city's lights. My thoughts melted into that flow until there was no division, no I watching, only movement and witness entwined. Then something shifted. My chest vibrated, my hands tingled, and a subtle warmth expanded from within, spiraling upward through the crown of my head. It wasn't bliss, it was remembrance. The inner and outer folded into each other, and for a moment, the world seemed made of luminous breath. Then it passed. I sat trembling, half afraid of what I had touched. Was this the pulse the old man spoke of? The original current before the Maker's design? It felt too intimate, too vast to name. I wrote later that night in my journal, "The Father is not somewhere. The Father is the stillness through which motion happens." From that day, I practiced daily, not seeking visions, only presence. I called it alignment, not asking. It began with gratitude in the past tense, as if the thing desired had already unfolded. Then silence, no words, only awareness dissolving into the body. Sometimes I felt nothing. Sometimes, the tingling would return, subtle but alive, connecting the heart and crown like a soft bridge of light. I no longer asked for healing or deliverance, I simply remembered wholeness and let the pulse answer. Weeks passed. I started meeting others drawn by curiosity or quiet hunger. At a small cafe, a woman approached me after overhearing my conversation with a friend. "I used to pray every night," she confessed. "Now, I don't feel anything. It's like the heavens went deaf." I smiled gently. "Maybe they're not deaf. Maybe they're inside your listening." She frowned, unsure whether it was comfort or confusion. I told her what the old man had told me, that prayer wasn't meant to travel outward but inward. "When you say, 'Father,'" I explained, "you're not calling to the sky. You're waking the source that forgot itself inside you." She asked if it was dangerous. I thought of his warning, the temples were built to control the story. "Dangerous only to the walls," I said. "Not to the soul." Over time, more came. They weren't disciples, they were mirrors. Each person brought a fragment of the same longing, the sense that the divine had been misplaced in translation. Together, we began to practice in silence, sitting by the river as dusk dissolved into violet haze. No chants, no icons, only breath and remembrance. When the silence grew deep enough, some would feel the warmth, the subtle stirring between heart and crown. We called it the seal, though no one claimed to create it. It was as if the forgotten current recognized itself through us. The city, meanwhile, began to whisper. Rumors spread of strange gatherings where people claimed to see the Father without the church. Some mocked us, others grew curious. Once, a local cleric confronted me, angered by what he called mystical arrogance. I told him gently that I sought no followers, no rebellion. But he didn't believe me. To him, faith without hierarchy was chaos. To me, it was remembrance returning home. The more I practiced, the less I needed to explain. Words dissolved at the edges of truth. When the pulse arose, I let it move through me, not as ecstasy, but as quiet alignment. Sometimes, in that stillness, visions surfaced, a vast field of light folding into itself, the Maker's architecture cracking like glass, and the source pouring through the gaps. I understood then why the old man said the prophet's ink failed. No scripture could hold what must be felt. In the weeks that followed, the river became our teacher. It reflected everything, light and darkness, stillness and motion, without preference. Watching it, I realized, this was how the source created, not by command but by reflection. The true prayer was imitation, mirroring stillness so the current could return. One night, as the moon rose crimson behind the towers, I placed the spiral stone at the water's edge. The current took it gently, spinning it downstream. I didn't feel loss, only a completion. I whispered, "The seal is not mine. It belongs to the silence." A quiet understanding bloomed within me, the Father's presence isn't achieved, it's unveiled. Each act of remembrance dissolves another layer of forgetting. The pulse remains, eternal and waiting. The first rupture came quietly, the way winter arrives in the bones before it touches the trees. I was in the hospital corridor, beneath a strip of humming lights that made everyone look a little transparent. My mother lay in a room down the hall, asleep after a long diagnosis spoken in a soft, exhausted voice. Machines whispered to her. Outside the window, a gray morning pressed its forehead to the glass. I had brought books for comfort, but they felt like ornaments. The old prayers rose to my lips out of habit, the kind that beg and bargain. I let them pass like birds migrating in the wrong season. Then I remembered the river, the spiral stone that had surrendered itself to current, and the old man's voice, not asking, aligning. I closed my eyes and let the pulse find me. Gratitude in the past tense, thank you for the wholeness already present, for the breath underneath the pain. Not a spell, not a demand. A quiet agreeing with what is deeper than circumstance. The tingling came, faint, as if touching the rim of a bell. Warmth gathered between my heart and crown, and my chest loosened. Tears flowed, gentle, not pleading but remembering. I didn't ask for years to be added or suffering to be erased. I remembered the source before form and felt it breathing through the form of my mother's body. I realized I loved her more truly in that moment, without the terror that love might fail if the world did not cooperate. The fear shrank to a small shadow in a wide field of light. When I opened my eyes, the corridor was the same, but I was not. I went in to sit with her, and we watched the pale sky brighten as if someone had washed it from within. The second test was Messier. A friend accused me of misleading people, of building a private ladder to God, while mocking the old roofs that kept them dry. We were in a café dense with steam and clinking cups. He had once been my closest confidant, but his posture had stiffened into principle, and mine, into silence. I'm not building a ladder, I said quietly. I'm pointing to the ground under our feet. He scoffed. You think people need none of it? No teaching, no authority? That's a child's rebellion dressed as wisdom. Part of me wanted to argue, to flex the new language I had learned. Instead, I listened for the pulse beneath the heat of my face. The practice did not excuse me from truth, it invited me to speak it without the poison of victory. I don't want to take anything away, I said. I want to notice what can't be taken. He called me vague and dangerous. He left without finishing his coffee. I sat with the sting and let it pass through. The temptation to convert him dissolved in the remembering that no one is converted by winning an argument. People soften where love has made space. By spring, our quiet river practice had become a rumor that could no longer be ignored. The city pressed its palms around us, journalists with clever questions, clergy with warnings, skeptics with laughter that hid a delicate curiosity. A small auditorium offered us a place to host an evening of silence. I hesitated, then agreed on one condition. There would be no speech beyond a few simple instructions, no claims, no leadership to bow to. Only stillness, gratitude in the past tense, and the soft invitation to feel for the pulse that joins heart to crown without leaving either behind. The hall filled beyond capacity. I could sense the mixture in the air, hope like a held breath, fear like a coat someone had forgotten to remove. I stepped to the front and said, what we are looking for is not outside this moment. It's not beyond the stars. We will not summon anything. We will remember. That was all. We sat. The city's noise trembled beyond the walls, a fading echo. Inside, something tender began to bloom. It didn't come from me. It came from the room itself, as if the awareness in each person recognized its neighbor and became larger than any individual. Some wept soundlessly. Some sighed. A few grew restless and left, even their footsteps felt included. I felt the seal arrive, not as a spectacle but as a permission. The warmth rose and dissolved, until stillness felt like a living river that had never stopped flowing. Afterward, in the vestibule, a woman approached me with eyes as bright as rain. "I didn't see anything," she said, hand on her chest. "But I am not outside my life anymore." I held her gaze. "Welcome home." It was not all gentle. A letter arrived from a council of local leaders demanding I cease the meetings. They used a vocabulary of concern that carried the weight of threat. I sat with the letter on my lap and watched my breath. The answer did not arrive as strategy. It arrived as clarity. We would continue, but we would remove my name. We would list no teachers, no hierarchy, no destination. The gatherings would be hosted by whoever wished to unlock a door and sweep the floor. No one to bring down, no center to seize. Institutions feed on central points, the pulse is a field. At home, the quieter tests kept me honest. When loneliness pressed, I noticed the urge to medicate it with praise or activity. Instead, I turned toward it and asked what it had to teach. Loneliness melted into spaciousness when I stopped calling it an enemy. When grief visited, unexpected, unscheduled, I let it speak in the old tongue, the one that needs no translation. I discovered that alignment is not a posture of dominance but of intimacy. It doesn't command life to obey, it dissolves the illusion that life is separate from what I am. Some nights I still doubted. I would lie awake, hearing the city's distant pulse and wonder whether I had mistaken a private comfort for universal truth. On those nights, I returned to the smallest practice, feeling the breath enter and leave, thanking the Father in the past tense for the wholeness that had not moved an inch. Not a performance, not even faith, more like a remembering that required no believer. The old man returned once, just once, or perhaps I dreamed him out of need. I was sitting by the river at dusk when he stepped from the fog like someone stepping into a room already theirs. He looked older and yet untouched by time. We sat with our shoulders almost touching, saying nothing for a while. Finally, I whispered, "It's working, but it's breaking things." He chuckled. "All true medicine breaks the fever. Do not confuse the shivering with dying." "I'm not trying to lead them," I said. "I don't want the weight." "Then you won't carry it," he replied. "Let the field do the work. Speak when silence asks you to put on a voice. Be quiet when words would only harvest attention." We watched the water, its skin turning the color of burnt copper. Before he vanished back into the fog, he added, almost playfully, "Remember, worship not what was made." I heard the rest without his saying it, worship the silence that made the maker. Summer arrived on soft feet. The gathering splintered into kitchens and parks and quiet rooms without signs. The pulse needed no stage. People carried it into their arguments and reconciliations, their hospitals and bedrooms, their laughter and their work. No creed followed them, only a warmth between heart and crown that made compassion easier than judgment. Even my skeptical friend returned one afternoon with eyes too tired for war. We shared a quiet cup of tea. He did not apologize. He didn't need to. This is how the revolt happened, not with banners, but with gentleness, not against institutions, but beyond them. The cost was real: misunderstandings, lost friendships, invitations withdrawn. Yet what remained was wider than what fell away. The Father I had been taught to chase across heaven had turned out to be the stillness in which everything that lives is held. And each time I forgot, the river was there, teaching me to flow by not forcing, to shine by not claiming, to love without campaigning. I am still learning. I suspect I always will be. But the seal has settled as a daily hum, the softest of instruments, playing the simplest of songs, at the exact center of my chest.